Welcome everybody to the webinar. Those of you who have joined a couple minutes early, we'll get started in just a few moments. Thank you all for being here. I'm seeing people coming in um, right now. Got a good crowd today. Really appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us. I know we're really excited about this discussion today about next gens in the family business, defining your purpose and role for long-term success. I'm Justin Albertson, and joining me today are two of my colleagues from FBCG, Shauna Lecuyer and Tom Amy. As I think most of you know or have experienced, stepping into the family business as a member of the rising generation can be exciting, but also can feel a little bit uncertain at times. And too often, next gen leaders are brought into the business without a clearly defined role. And as a result, and again, many of you might have experienced this, left wondering a little bit about what's your purpose rather than stepping into a position that really allows you to contribute with confidence. So today we want to explore how to establish credibility, discuss the importance of intentionality at the onset to design roles that are well defined, integrated into the team, and tied to the success of the business. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we'll explore what it takes to earn credibility, design roles that matter, and ensure alignment with the business from the start. We'll have some time at the end for questions. A few notes before we get started. We are recording today's session, and we'll send out an email link or an email with the link to access the webinar. A note on confidentiality. Any references or examples that we share today are anonymous, so we're not going to share anything specific, or they might be an amalgamation of some multiple situations. As I mentioned, we're going to answer some questions. You can submit your questions anonymously, meaning we're not going to announce who's asking the questions. Use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. We'll also have a survey at the end of the webinar and greatly appreciate your feedback if you'd be so kind to fill that out for us. So thank you in advance for doing that. So let's meet Shauna and Tom. They have over 50 years of combined experience helping family businesses prosper across generations. And as a way to introduce them to you, I want to ask each of them to share what they're most passionate about in their work. We'll start with you, Shauna. Shauna, you've got a law degree from Loyola. You've led legal, HR, and risk functions for a family business. You've served on several boards. You've written articles on various family business topics, spoken at conferences, and are currently working on a book. What drives you? What are you most passionate about in your work?
Oh, well, thank you for that, Justin. As you mentioned, I worked with three generations of family, third, fourth, and fifth, all working in the business together at the same time. And I saw, the challenges inherent in families working together. And I'm really passionate about helping families come together and find these strategies. So this topic, obviously near and dear to my heart. I worked with onboarding 10 members of the fifth gen for the family I worked with for the last almost 30 years now. And so helping with perpetuation strategies, succession, solid governance, all of those things that we know help families work better together and support that family harmony and that perpetuation. That for me has been central in my career, and it's something that I'm really very passionate about. So I'm thrilled to be here today talking about this subject.
Great, thank you, Shauna. I'm glad you're here. So, Tom, you've dedicated your entire career to developing others from your studies in counseling psychology at Western Michigan and organizational behavior and leadership development at Michigan State to starting a leadership development firm. You've written and spoken about identity in the family business and family harmony, among other topics. What drives you? What are you most passionate about?
Thanks, Justin. Great to be here with you and Shauna and Kelly off screen. When I ask a passion question, it's really tough to focus because I'm passionate about a lot of things. But I think if I had to put it in a couple simple words, I think this notion of getting families to a place where they have enough hope to become aligned. Because when a family is aligned, believing and leaning into the same direction, I really think they can do amazing things. And I've seen that over and over again. And that's kind of one of the things that I do. And it is incredibly satisfying to take a group of folks who were maybe hopeless and worried that this would, I mean, could we even get together for Thanksgiving? And now they're functioning well together. That is a joy.
All right, great. Really appreciate you guys sharing that. I know that I've experienced that passion firsthand. I'm glad we can share a little bit of that with folks who haven't met you today. And I believe that we really could not have found a better duo for this particular webinar. And if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about Shauna and Tom, you can look them up on our website, read some of the things that they've written about. Before we dive into some of the details today, we have a few questions for all of you so we can get to know you a little bit better today and help shape our discussion. So we've got a few polling questions. So we're going to ask the first one now, which is, what generation are you in your family business? So we've got a few choices here. Are you an entrepreneur in the first gen, second gen, third, fourth, or fifth, or more? I'm always interested to see how many fall into that category. Surely a lot of complexity there. So appreciate you taking a minute to do that. We'll just give another moment or two for folks to fill that out, and then we'll see where we're at. Looks like we've got the majority that are second and third, but a pretty good spread across there.
Kind of
Generally,
looks like a bell curve.
yeah, it really does. Yeah, we got 10% fifth generation or above, which is pretty cool. So thanks for that. Okay, so question two is, which of the following best represents your family's enterprise? Are you a family-owned operating company with family in leadership and governance? Do you have a set of diverse family holdings or assets with family primarily in ownership and beneficiary roles, primarily family office or foundation? Or if none of those seem to represent your family's current enterprise, you can select other. We got a few others it looks like coming in. I'm always interested to see the spread on this one as well. So we'll give you guys just another moment or two to fill that out, and then we'll share the results. I can see behind the scenes so far, family-owned operating company is leading the way by quite a large margin here. So we got about 3/4 of the group today is family-owned operating companies, which would make sense since we're talking about some specific roles in the family business. Okay, one more, and then we'll get started. The last one is, when it comes to your role in the family business, how clearly defined is it? Everything from it's very clear and you have a very defined responsibilities and expectations, to somewhere in the middle, to it's not really defined at all, to you might not be currently working in the family business. That's very possible as well. So we see the results coming in. Thanks for taking a moment to do these questions for us. So far, we've got a bit of a bell curve as well. Let's take a look at these results. So most folks are kind of in the middle, but pretty good spread. Well, thank you for doing that. That gives us a little bit of context to the conversation today. And what we want to get started with is grounding our dialogue in a concept of credibility. And we know that simply having the family name doesn't necessarily establish credibility. So the real question is, what does? And why is this so important to the dialogue? Tom, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'd glad to. I think the key with credibility is you got to earn it. And I think that can be challenging as you enter the family's business, because when you come into the family business, there are so many layers of identity that you're bringing in. And on some level, you have this rich history and this legacy that you're part of and that precedes you. And there's also a sense that you as an individual are starting from scratch and need to establish why people would follow you, why people would be influenced by you. And that's really what credibility is the ability to influence others meaningfully. And so you've got it for individuals. How do I, as someone entering the business, establish trust, belief, confidence? that I can lead, that I can complete my tasks. I mean, you dialed in today because you believe there's something about what we're going to offer that could be useful to you. I mean, at that simple level, why would you do that? Because we have at least some amount of credibility on this topic. And that's what we're trying to help our individual next gens. But for the group, for the family, and for people who would lead even more, I think it's important to understand that credibility is like this bank account that you constantly have to make deposits into. And so everything you do is a question of, does it increase your credibility, or does it detract from, or sort of take deposits out? But there are some downsides, as Sean is going to say, about not developing credibility.
Yeah. I thank you for that perspective, Tom. I think sometimes we forget that, credibility, there's actually two types. And we see them at play. And by the way, I think next gen leaders especially, they want to be credible in my experience. I don't know if you've seen that as well, Tom, but I mean,
Mhm.
I'm working with one right now, and he's been very, very clear that he wants to make sure that the people around him see his desire to bring value and to support the team and to be somebody that they actually want to work with. And so, we forget though about the two different types of credibility, that internal credibility and then also that external. And both are really essential for success. I call credibility as the currency of your trust, just like you referenced the bank account. But that internal credibility is that sense of self-confidence, right? Knowing that I'm ready, I'm appropriately prepared, I'm qualified for the job that I've been given to do, and I'm willing to do the heavy lifting required to contribute meaningfully to our team, just like everybody else. It's also about self-awareness and recognizing strengths and being honest about those areas for growth and actively working on that personal inventory to nurture the latter. But when someone's placed in a role without the skills or the track record or the preparation that they need, it's really easy to underestimate rather that internal struggle that they might be experiencing. Sometimes they won't even talk about it. We may see the obvious, the more visible struggles, but we often miss that toll of mental chatter happening beneath the surface, and that pressure that can lead to overwhelm or isolation or even sometimes defensiveness. And instead of building confidence, then the role can actually start to erode it. So that's a challenging piece, I think, that we overlook. There's also that external credibility, and we all know that saying respect is earned and not given. And external credibility is really earned through how we show up, by being accountable, by delivering results, by bringing real value to the team and the organization. And it's built through both character and contribution. And that's what gives others a reason to trust and follow us. So what I do see over and over, and I'm sure you have as well, Tom, we see individual struggles, as you noted. The work suffers. So the teams hesitate then to rely on somebody that they don't fully trust, which then leads to bottlenecks and rework and slower performance. Team dynamics can fracture. That's a real challenge. And high performers start growing resentful because they feel the pressure to perform at maybe even a higher level when the team isn't perceived as pulling their weight. And that frustration can really undermine morale and drive great talent away. But I think the other piece that we forget about is that leadership potential stalls. So without credibility, the person can't really influence others, and they end up as a figurehead rather than a leader that people genuinely want to follow. And so we start here with this topic of credibility because it isn't optional. It's the foundation for individual success and team cohesion. And when you put somebody in a role without it, you're not just setting them up to struggle, you're destabilizing the entire environment around them. And I think in family enterprise, the risk multiplies. It doesn't just impact a business performance, but it erodes trust within the family. It weakens the shared commitment that's so essential to carrying out the company's mission and values. And over time, those ripples affect the entire culture. And I know, Tom, you feel pretty strongly about the impacts on culture.
Well, I think, culture is also sort of a currency. And I know we're talking about credibility, culture. Soon we're going to talk about clarity. I'd like to apologize in advance. We're not going to alliterate this entire webinar, but so hang in there with us. But culture is really important because, I mean, simply I define it as what are the agreements, both spoken and clear and unspoken and sort of inferred or understood that we have regarding what we value and how we're going to do our work together. What's important and how do we do our work together? And so one of the things you see is that, like it or not, and you probably have experienced this, family members working in the business have a bit of a microscope or a telescope, but there's a lot of attention. And so everyone sort of generalizes how they did in this meeting later this afternoon as to whether or not, their future at the firm is bright or whether the family's still engaged. And so it's really important that that you understand that your behavior as you're building credibility also has significant symbolic meaning in the culture. And it sort of reinforces or undermines this notion of what we as individuals, what we as a family, and what we as an entire organization say we value and how we want to do our work together. It also a culture of what is good leadership? And hopefully in your organization, you've defined what's good culture, what's good leadership, and all that. And we can certainly help you with that if you haven't done that yet. But it's really important if you're going to be measured that you know what the measuring stick is. So, and let me just say, I realize I'm loading a lot now on the shoulders of the next gen because that's the focus of our webinar. I would also say, in fairness, everyone, leaders at all levels, need to be concerned about credibility and building a culture that aligns with the stated values. Who do we say we are? I love when we bring a new consultant into our firm. One of the first questions I ask is, are we behaving the way we said we would? I mean, does sort of the sales pitch match your lived reality? And I look for gaps because I want us to close that. Fortunately, we're not seeing a lot of those, but we're going to keep asking. And that's how you do it. Culture is essential for people believing that you are who you say you are. In fact, culture is sort of like this organizational credibility, if you will. And that's all I have on that.
Thank you both. One of the conversations I tend to have with families from time to time, as it relates to this idea of helping, it's typically a conversation around how do I help somebody coming up establish their credibility. The question of a title in the business comes up, and I think we all know that a title doesn't necessarily equal credibility. So if anybody out there is thinking, oh, I can just, give somebody a high level title and that should help with the issue of credibility, so you probably need to think again about that. But it'd be great to hear you guys talk a little bit about how important is a title and what role would that play in your mind in terms of establishing credibility?
You
Well,
want to take that, Shauna?
sure. I see this often, and it's not just a challenge for next gen. I've even seen this now, pulling my old HR hat out, where we give somebody a title, whether it's family or not, that may not actually either match the value that the role brings, or doesn't necessarily match what the person is capable of bringing to the role. And that's really it's unfortunate when that happens. So the title is conferring basically a positional authority. So the formal right to, quote, make a decision or assign the work or assess certain information, but authority rooted only in your position can only take you so far. And what we end up finding is that people will comply on the surface because they have to, but not necessarily because they believe in you. And what we'll see happening is that there's workarounds that they start developing as a team. And then the person in the position with the title feels pretty defeated because they're like, wait a second, I'm being undermined, or people aren't coming to me, or I'm not being included. And so that is a challenge. Credibility, on the other hand, though, comes from this demonstrated competence, from integrity and consistency. And it's what makes people want to follow you. And that's where your real power lies, not the power to command, but the power, as Tom mentioned earlier, to influence, to align, to inspire others. So what we find is when you've been given the title without the credibility, the person you're really kind of setting them up to struggle a bit there, because they often run into resistance or outright disengagement. And when somebody does have that credibility, even without the title, we find others naturally seek their input and support their ideas. It's true of anybody in leadership, and it's you find this term credibility really scattered throughout most leadership studies.
Right.
And it's not developed simply by handing somebody a title.
Yeah, I like that perspective. I think a title simply is something that sort of helps people understand generally what you're supposed to be doing, which is further developed by the job description that appears under the title that should be reviewed frequently based on the experience that you're having and people around you, right? And so that's kind of the HR answer. Uh, One of the things that occurred to me as we were planning this is so much about what we're talking about has to do with how one develops their identity. And I'm very interested in identity development. It's kind of outside our scope today. I think of it whenever we say the word purpose, though. And so if you're interested, I've done a webinar on, it's called Who Am I? And it gets at the identity piece. But sometimes we see people, family and non, sort of leverage their last name or their title or some other piece of sort of symbolic power as they overplay their hand, I would say. And that would undermine credibility, I believe, because people feel like that's all they've got. And so the idea is that you continue to live up to the promise of your title insofar as it fulfills the functions that that title does and fits into the culture that we're trying to build together. Values, who do we say we are, and do our work together.
Thank, thank you for the perspective on that one. And Tom, you started to touch on our next topic, which is really about designing roles that matter and role clarity. The idea of a meaningful role versus a symbolic role obviously could have a lot of impact on credibility. But what do you advice would you give to the audience about what it takes to design a role that truly matters for the individual and for the business? Shauna, do you want to maybe start us off on that one?
Well, thank you, Justin. I really love this question because it gets to the heart of something that families sometimes overlook. If credibility is the foundation, I like to think of role design as the structure that you build on it. You can bring in a capable, well-intentioned next-gen family member into the business, but if the role isn't clearly defined or if it's not meaningfully designed, you're setting them up to wobble on that foundation. So role clarity is what gives purpose its shape. And when a role is thoughtfully designed, it gives the next generation a clear direction and a real way to contribute. And when that clarity is missing, they're left guessing about what's expected or where their authority begins and ends or how success will be measured. And as we just discussed, when clarity is missing, credibility suffers too. And I think
Hmm.
the other piece I would add to this is that a big watch out when you have family members in adjacent or roles that are maybe overlapping in some way, and we've not really given them role clarity. It can also create some family disharmony and unintentional rub um, that I don't think a lot of family members stop and really think about. And so I find that even in my work, oftentimes it's not a personality issue. It's because we haven't clearly defined the role, and you've got two family members inadvertently stepping on each other's toes. It's like we haven't named the dance, and so we're stepping on each other's feet. So there's a few core elements that I think distinguish a meaningful role from a symbolic one. And one is very clear responsibility. So not a vague expectation or, throwing somebody in the deep end and saying, kind of figure it out as you go. But being really clear about what are the responsibilities and then define decision-making authority is so important. Understanding what's in scope and what's out of it and where they have the right and or the need to act. And then I think third is accountability. So knowing, who do they report to? How is performance evaluated? What outcomes are they responsible for delivering? My own coach used to use a phrase regularly, and I've stolen it selfishly. So Fraser, if you're listening, I give you credit for it. But he would always say, "Do we know what success looks like?" And I think that's so crucial when we're thinking about role clarity: is have we defined it? So let's normalize this all for a second, though, because we're talking about these things, and people are kind of going like, "Gosh, it sounds like so much." But the reality is, the when businesses hire externally, they don't post a blank job description. If you were to go on any of these job boards, Indeed, etc., there's a whole litany of here's what the job's responsible for, who it's here's what you need to succeed. Here's how the role impacts the organization. Here's the compensation that goes with it. Here's the types of experiences that we want you to have. So most companies would never dream of hiring somebody into a job without a clearly defined job description, but they think nothing of placing a next gen leader into a loosely defined role and then wonder why they might flounder or suffer, or why people around them aren't taking the role or the person in it seriously. And it's unfortunately a double standard that quietly undermines both the individual and the business. So when these elements are absent, I think we fall into this trap of creating what I call kind of a placeholder role. And these are more symbolic jobs that are kind of given to, we want to give the next gen something to do. And on the surface, it may look like inclusion, and that may absolutely be the intention. But in practice, those roles can erode confidence and team trust, which is not at all, I think, the intention, but is the unfortunate result that we see. So instead of reinforcing legitimacy, they unintentionally reinforce entitlement, which undermines credibility. We both know that, both personally and culturally. I do want to say, though, this doesn't mean that every role has to be permanent or perfectly defined from day one. I had to define transitional roles for next gen coming in because they were being thoughtfully integrated into our succession plans, and I needed to figure out how do we get them from where they are now to where we want them to be. But even in those kind of transitional roles, and those temporary roles are incredibly valuable, but we were intentional with them. So rotations or project-based assignments that build skills and credibility are fantastic, particularly when they are anchored in clear learning objectives, defined outcomes, and visible contributions for the business. And this is where many families, I think, can experiment, can learn, and can build trust. But making sure truly that they're designed intentionally and everybody around them understands here's what this person's accountable to and how they're bringing value. And I think, this goes without saying, but let's not underestimate a deceptively simple tool, a good job description. So it's not just an HR formality. I highly encourage families, like, engage your HR professional, let them support you in this. A good job description is a clarity document, and it aligns expectations, it provides guardrails, creates a shared understanding of what success looks like, both for the individual and for the rest of the team, because they have their own job description. They know what they're accountable to. But when you bring somebody else into the mix and it's not clear to them what this new person's accountable to, it creates confusion and challenges all around. So I think the big takeaway here is that role design is not busy work, it's strategic. And when these roles are well crafted, they're vehicles for growth, contribution, and for credibility. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's also very helpful with family harmony. So I stress early and often, spend some time on this process, ensure clarity. It's going to support the business. It'll support the business, or the individual rather, and it can go a really long way in supporting that family harmony.
It strikes me that much of what you've just described is important for all employees of a business, right? Is that often when I'm in a succession continuity, we're starting to get more role clarity and measure kind of what the outputs are for different people entering the business. We realize that that's an opportunity for a business to sort of check and make sure that, everyone wants to have clarity around their role, because then they can know what's expected.
In their career path.
Yeah,
Right.
career path to the win. Now, in family businesses, I would just do a sidebar that's outside our scope, but this is a great time to make sure that your family employment policy exists, and then also includes care for the non-family supervisors of family. That's something I see a lot of family employment policies not having. And so you have non-family supervisors wondering, how should I treat this person who has the same last name as the CEO and the chair of the board? And I think clarifying that and then, supporting them in that is really important.
I think that's huge, Tom. And it's also why I say, like, bring in your HR team. I had the good fortune with the family I worked for. They had created a family employment policy. I was brought into that mix as part of a mentoring team for the family. but it gave me clear guidance on what the family expected of that next gen working in the business. It gave me clear guidance on how I was to help the family uphold those guidelines. It gave the employee clear guidance. It gave the managers clear guidance. And that's another, I would say, second to the job description, if not in tandem with so crucial, not just that you create it, but that everybody understands it.
Oh,
Right.
excellent. Yeah,
Right.
good point.
So it's one thing to have a clearly defined role, and it's another for that role to connect to the bigger picture. Why is that alignment to the bigger picture and to the business so important to consider? And how can families make sure that next gen contributions aren't just meaningful to them, maybe in their learning and development, but also has an impact on the enterprise?
Well, I really like the word meaningful, Justin, because I think all of us want to make a meaningful contribution, whatever we're doing. And so, whether you're in the family business, you're out of the family business, you're family, you're not family, everyone wants to make a meaningful contribution. I mean, I really hope, I think I said it in our practice. I hope this is meaningful to the people who attend. And so that's really motivational. It brings clarity, it provides purpose. And so that alignment is one way to achieve meaning. For people looking in, if you're contributing meaningfully to the business goals, and let's assume that the business goals are clear and people understand what they are, and there's a path to that, and there's metrics around it, then you're aligning yourself with something larger than yourself. You're saying, I'm contributing to the whole thing. And that, in my role. And I think that's powerful in building credibility. One of the things that I notice here is, particularly for next gens, and this is where I really speak up in defense of next gens, and I'll share a brief anecdote after I make this point, is that it's okay to let the organization know that you're intentionally developing one of your next gens on a career path toward perhaps a C level or whatever it is, and they get a learning curve. So that's my first next gen defense statement that I say, hey, they get a learning curve. Everyone gets a learning curve. And the second one I say, and I actually confronted an entire board of directors on this because you had a 30 something G5 who was just trying to work his way through the development path. And they're in the board meeting wondering if he really has what it takes to be the CEO. And I just said, that's not fair. No one gets litmus tested 20 years before they're going to be in the position as to whether or not they can be in the position, right? If there's a clear development plan, let's work that plan. Let's have clear outcomes and let's give feedback along the way. But part of the feedback, 6 steps away from an outcome, isn't, well, I don't know if you've got what it takes. That's not good leadership. That's not good culture. It erodes your own credibility. So let's give next gens a break. Give them a learning curve. Let them be good at the thing that they're focused on now. And I think that's really important. The other thing is business outcomes matter, and that matters in any business. And sometimes in family businesses, there can be a lot of focus on a lot of other things. And it's important that everyone understand that business outcomes matter. So roles should be linked to measurable outcomes, growth initiatives, all the things. And then you provide this value, this sense that you're contributing to the overall. One of the things that I caution people entering the organization is don't be too flexible for too long. There's this really winsome mindset is, I just want to help the family business. Put me in, coach.
Yep.
And the problem is over time, you're just a utility player, but there's no clear sense of what you're really good at, and you haven't really moved the organization because you're going from thing to thing to thing to thing, and that can work against you. So beware of that. Little flexibility, fantastic, but not too much flexibility over time.
Right. Right. So, Shauna, when a role is really aligned with the business, what value might families and enterprises experience?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question. I mean, Tom, building on what you just said there, I mean, the reality is the next gen coming in, and I think all family members, they want to make an impact, right? They want to bring value, and they want work that's meaningful for them and their own legacy. And I think that's something that oftentimes we overlook or forget. So when a role has been beautifully crafted on paper with clear responsibilities and accountability structures, but it's not really connected to I would say kind of the clear priorities or strategic direction of the business, there's a huge risk there of that either A, becoming irrelevant, or B, being seen as one of those kind of placeholder positions. So we want to avoid them, obviously, but alignment is what transforms that role from being well-intentioned to one where they can actually make an impact. And I think that's so crucial to remember. So when alignment's done well, I think the benefits really ripple across the enterprise in powerful ways. And there's three that I see coming up time and again. So one is accelerated leadership readiness. Tom, you're absolutely right. It's really unfair to start looking at somebody right out of the gate and making assumptions about where they are going to be on their career path. I think that's important that you're putting measurements in place, that you're very clear to the next gen about this is what we're looking at, this is what success looks like, and this is how we're defining it. And we're not moving you on to the next role until we see, competence displayed here and your own confidence in the position and in the skills needed to move on to the next role. So I think that when you do this well, you are actually accelerating that leadership readiness. So you're giving them the true experiences that are needed and that are going to matter most to the business, which accelerates that readiness to step into larger leadership responsibilities with greater confidence and greater credibility. I think the second one there is really increase organizational momentum and focus. Even as kids, we would, maybe they don't do that today, but Tom, I'm sure you and I remember when you were on the playground and you would each take a turn choosing who you wanted on your team for kickball or softball or whatever it was, right? I mean, we all want to work with people that we think are going to help us collectively as a team to win, right? And so when we see that these next gen leaders are owning roles that are tied to meaningful initiatives and they're driving those strategic priorities forward, their leadership and their commitment to their family and their skills, when you've carefully made sure that you've helped them develop those, bring fresh perspective and energy and focus to projects that might otherwise lose steam. So I think well-aligned roles help concentrate that effort where it matters the most and creates real traction for the business. I think the third that we see regularly is the stronger cross-generational trust and engagement that can occur here. So alignment builds trust on multiple levels. Senior leaders, maybe as non-family, which was a role I was in. When I would see this, I saw next gen stepping into meaningful work. It gave me inspired confidence in me and in them. I think those non-family employees also see accountability and contribution, which is so important to this dialogue. And then rising leaders themselves feel trusted and empowered. And so their own self-confidence soars in this. And this combination strengthens engagement across the organization and really reinforces a healthy collaborative culture. So I think the big takeaway here is that alignment gives roles weight and meaning, and it's what turns them from symbolic positions into strategic engines for growth, for leadership development, and cultural strength. And that's where we start to see that the combination of credibility, contribution, and succession planning really reinforce each other in a powerful way.
Something that occurs to me as you're talking, one, I was a little triggered by your grade school playground example because I never got picked early. I hadn't grown into my body yet, and I wasn't very good at sports. I'd probably get picked earlier now, but nobody's asking. The second one, and that's more important and relevant to our conversation, is, I get a sense that we're talking about structure and process as if it exists. And I think it's important to stop and say, hey, leading generation, it is important that you have some sort of infrastructure and framework into which to hang the various things. So you can't ask a next gen to enter the business and be the director of something or even lower in the organization and perform according to some alignment with organizational goals if there's not clarity around that. And senior gen, that's yours. Board, hold them accountable to developing that, right? So it's the whole system really that contributes to success at this level. And that's providing enough structure so the path to the win is clear.
1000%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the concepts of inclusion and integration came up in the conversation a little bit earlier. And I think it would be good to get into that just a little bit and maybe differentiate between inclusion and integration and think about how to ensure that the role, now that we've defined it, we've got a good job description. We took Shauna's advice and we did that well. We've got expectations set. We know how it aligns to the business. Um, how does that really help to build legitimacy, and what are the risks of not truly integrating the role in the business?
Yeah, when we talk about inclusion and integration, and it's forgive me for how folksy this is, but I'm thinking about breakfast. And when it comes to breakfast, the chicken's involved. It provides the eggs, but the pig's committed. It provided the bacon, right? And so I think there's this difference in sort of you could be included in that you're sort of part of the team. Your name's on the list. You have a business card, a nameplate, all that. But integration means, in my estimation, that you're contributing meaningfully because there's a way of understanding how your role fits. You've developed enough credibility to dispatch the duties of that role, and that role sort of contributes with your team, not just you, but with your team, to the overall goals of the business, especially to the core business, what you're there for. So if it operates in isolation, or sometimes I hear families refer to Siberia, like, well, Uncle Joe doesn't really contribute anymore. This isn't a next gen example, but so we put him out in Siberia and he's tinkering, out in the shop somewhere. But that's isolation. And for next gens, it's sort of a dead end, and we want to be careful. We need to develop or have a hard conversation around that. How do existing functions, right? So we're not creating this whole new thing unless it adds unique value, and that can be right. And there are sometimes someone asked earlier, well, this is a common practice to have people work outside the business before they come in. And someone had said, kind of what's some of the ways of measuring that? That's a good question. I want to take it a slightly different way now. How do we are there exceptions to that, right? It's not absolute. And we say it depends a lot. And sometimes a next gen may have a skill set or something that they can bring energy to something that the leading gen doesn't have. And maybe they don't have a ton of work experience, but they have some knowledge. I saw this happen. Somebody came right out of undergrad and they had the energy and knowledge to do an enterprise software system integration that the senior gen, it just overwhelmed them to think about it. And that added a ton of value. That's not a frequent example, but it can be there because it was well integrated into what the business needed. Uh, this notion of a sidecar business is really interesting, or sort of symbolic inclusion. I think the best way to illustrate that, I think, Shauna, you've got a good story about that.
Oh, I do actually. And by the way, we hold the families we work with in strict confidence. So this is not in any way sharing this family's story. This is taken from a few different situations that I've seen now that are all very, very similar. But this is, I think, a good example that I saw. So I worked with a manufacturing company where the founder really wanted his son to become involved in the business. He had other kids already involved in the business, but his oldest son, this was important to him that he be involved as well. And so the son joined the company, but from the outset, his role was really unclear. And he wasn't being held to the same performance standards as the rest of the team. And so over time, resentment really started to build, and colleagues noticed that he wasn't contributing in a meaningful way and that he wasn't accountable to the same metrics that determine their own bonuses, for instance. And as a result, people
Mm.
began to work around him because they saw him as an obstacle rather than as a partner in reaching their goals. And so the dad saw this going on, and he decided instead he would fund what I call kind of a sidecar business, as like side venture, and it was being funded through the company. And he leased space for his son to set up a small operation focused on refurbishing and reselling vintage motorcycles, something that his son was passionate about, and the dad and the son bonded over. And so the problem was that this had nothing to do with the company's core business. I mean, they were in manufacturing, in food manufacturing, no less. And so um, employees saw company funds being used for this new venture. Well, they're struggling to hit operational targets that, were directly impacted their variable pay. So they're looking at these budgets and saying, hey, I could use this money for capital needs to help me hit my goals. And a good portion of my total compensation is variable based on hitting our goals and our targets. And now this money is leaving the kind of budgetary coffers to fund this other sidecar thing. So one person actually pointed out, hey, money being spent on this motorcycle space is exactly what we needed for this critical software upgrade that would have improved our inventory tracking. And that was a key metric tied to their bonus. So as you can imagine, this decision started creating some real cultural ripple effects. Morale declined, turnover started increasing, productivity and safety scores started to slip. And eventually when the son lost interest in the motorcycle venture, because he's off here in, as you mentioned, in Siberia, he didn't feel like he was really doing something meaningful for the business of anyway. And he wanted to come back. But by this point now, the team made it very clear to the founder, if he comes back, we're out. We're not going to leave or stay rather. So while the example sounds extreme, we often see versions of this play out. And what starts as a well-meaning attempt maybe to involve the next gen can undermine credibility and strain the culture and put the family and the business in a really difficult position.
And over time, it really affects that next gen's sense of self and their
Yeah,
identity because it becomes clear over time that mom or dad wants me to be in the business, but clearly I don't fit. And that can create a real crisis.
yeah.
So what seems as well, we want to help the next gen out, so we're going to do this thing, ultimately becomes something that doesn't allow them to find the place where they find the most meaning.
Yeah, it's so true and it's so critical. And over time, family harmony suffers from that as well. It
It
can
does.
to create a real rub.
Right. Yeah. And so, just to close this point, the perception of this matters. It matters to the individual. I'm pretty sure that I understand that I'm in Siberia after a while. And that's big. Certainly the perception in your example of how the others who are trying to deliver on the company goals, that's a big deal. So there's a bit of a credibility issue then that begins to spread to the other family members who were involved in this decision. And then the second point is simply that if the opposite is, if you truly integrate the person, you give them all this great playing space to build the credibility, to reinforce their legitimacy and build on the legacy of what's come before. So there's a fork in the road there, and it's pretty clear.
Yeah,
Absolutely agree.
great. Well, we have a few questions that have come in while you have been sharing such great perspective with our team, and the main theme really is around this inclusion integration topic, and one of them is about the kind of the notion that a best practice could be that you have a next gen work outside the business and then later join the family business. And the question is, if you're going to do that, are there certain success measures that you would recommend would be important? And then, do you suggest that they join the family business if they are able to achieve those success measures? So curious your perspective on that.
May I?
Please.
This is just had this conversation with a client probably in the last month. And what they're doing is they're developing their employment policy, and it is a common practice to say go outside and get external experience. But that's all it said. So it didn't qualify what kind of experience. And so what I suggest is, and this I think is going to fit in with a lot of the great points that Shauna made, is what do you want them to understand in order to enter the business, generally and specifically? So are they an engineer? Then what do they need to know about engineering? And then what do they need to know about and demonstrate, not just know, but demonstrate in the other job in order do you want them to have a position of leadership? Do you want them to have oversight over certain size of outputs budgetarily? What is it? So don't just send them on a lap and something magical is going to happen because they took the lap. Have learning outcomes. And I think that does two things. One, it makes the win clear to them. It also sets up standards so that all the next gen understands what's expected and it's fair across the board.
Yeah. With the family that I worked with, as we were beginning to see more and more members of the fifth gen show interest in the family business, that family employment policy it was invaluable, and it was pretty explicit about how they were to conduct themselves and expectations from the family. And one of them was, external working opportunities. And with that, we had the responsibility internally of developing processes that helped us verify, like, were these things spelled out in the family employment guidelines? Were they followed? Is the spirit of it followed, et cetera? And so part of this too, I would say, is having a very, very solid intake process, if you will. So there were a number of us who were non-family executives tasked with kind of upholding this policy. And as part of integrating that next gen and bringing them in, when they did express interest, we put them through a pretty robust interview process. First with the CEO, who was a G4, then with the three of us that led this team. And part of that process was making sure that they had actually been pressure tested externally, that they, did have requisite skills now that they could bring to the business and that we could really leverage in a real way. And I think too, the piece that gets overlooked by that is that if this next gen at some point is going to be hiring or firing or retaining employees in some kind of management role, giving them that external experience also helps them understand that people coming into the business, this is what they would typically be exposed to anywhere else. And it gives them, I think, invaluable insight into how the rest of the world kind of, quote, lives and breathes and functions. And it gives them and sets them up with some normalcy around what is business and expectations that they may not ordinarily have, because the reality is they are pressured differently when coming into the business as a next gen. And so to be able to have that opportunity to go somewhere where they're not a next gen and to at least experience what is a kind of normal employment situation, I think is so critical for their ability to relate better than with the people that they later begin to either employ, develop, work amongst, or work for.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. You mentioned employment policy in there, and it's come up a couple of times. And we had a question come in from somebody that has an employment policy, and in that policy it says we're not for a family member. So the role has to exist, which I understand. And then also sort of trying to follow Tom, you're thinking about, well, we want to give them a chance to develop, right? We want to give them a chance to grow and learn. So the question is, if you've got that situation, you've got a family member who's got a lot of passion, they're committed to the business. What suggestion would you have for being able to start bringing somebody like that into the operating fold?
Here's my concern about the complexity of what we're trying to address in the tiny little bit of time we have to address
Sure.
is that you could misunderstand. And so what we're doing is we're making a bullet pointed list of things you can do, which can come off as structure's the answer. Build lots of policies, have every document be perfect, and you'll be great. And that's not true. And so it's a both and. And so this is a great example of how that's a fantastic element. We're not going to create a position as part of our employment policy. Great principle, but it can't be held rigidly. Example, client who had my ignorance in this area is going to show here, but they had some kind of malware, cyber attack, something or other happen, and they were held hostage for quite a bit of money. They did not have an existing position called cybersecurity. They had a next gen who's a crackerjack at cybersecurity. By golly, that guy came in and saved their bacon.
Yeah.
Then they created a role. So, see, if you rigidly stuck to that in your employment policy, you'd kind of be out of luck, wouldn't you? And we could find several examples. And yet, it's a good idea to say we're not going to create roles out of thin air, or you're going to have a lot of these restoring motorcycles in Siberia example that Shauna gave. So see the balance, I hope.
Yeah. I think that's so well said, Tom. And the reality is when you are doing a succession plan, and I know even from my experience, I had created a high potential program. And so part of that high potential was we had a succession plan. We saw where the business would, where we anticipated that it would go. We knew some of the roles that we would need to either in time create. They may not be needed then, but we were thinking ahead. And then we were also looking at this through this lens of, we've got people in key positions that are likely going to be retiring in the next 3, 5 years. And when you start layering that all in together, you're tasked then with looking at your hypos and your next gens and saying, how do we develop them and bring them to a place where they can start bringing tremendous value in areas where we know we will have need? And so the reality is one of the ways that you do that, it's not just sending them for more schooling, et cetera. Sometimes it's interim roles. And we did that with our hypos and next gens, where at times there was an interim role. It was there to help get them from here to here because we knew here is where we're going to have a gap in a couple of years. So I couldn't agree more. Like there is a lot here, moving parts, if you will, this isn't about a 1, 2, 3 punch. Every business is different. Your needs are different. And the reality is that succession planning, people planning, and development mean that at times folks might be in a transitionary role. Again, make sure there's clear outcomes and learning that you're looking for so that you can move them into the next space. But that's not uncommon. And it's a good business practice at times to move people into roles to challenge them and to help maybe develop parts of their leadership or their experience that they are going to need in 3 to 5 years.
Right. Thank you for that. So we're closing in on the top of the hour, and you may have started to touch on this a little bit just in some of your last comments. But what I wanted to do before we wrap up for today is to have each of you give some key takeaways, one, two, or three, maybe. If it's just one, that's great. What would you most want people to take away from today? If they heard nothing else from us today, what would you want them to remember? Tom, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'm really bad at these pick one thing. I mean, if you asked me what my favorite food was, I'd go into vapor lock. But I think maybe that point that I made, just because it was recent, but next gens entering a system do well when there's enough structure in that system that they understand what's expected and how to achieve a win. And there's accountability. And in my vernacular, accountability means not only sort of feedback about how you can do better, but also accolades when you do well. So that sort of a system is really important. And leading Jen, I'm looking at you for that.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Thank you, Tom. Shauna, what would you say?
I would echo that. I think, Tom, that's such an important point. But I think too to just normalize this, like it's a process,
Yeah.
and it doesn't always come together right out of the gate clearly, and that's why people reach out to us and ask for our help and our support with it. So one, I would just say, like, if you are struggling with this, know that that's not uncommon, right? It's not an easy thing to do, and sometimes you may not know where to start. And so I would say, like, start with some of these basic frameworks. Success is not automatic. It's intentional, it's earned. Create some clarity, put some structures in place, make sure that you're not just throwing next gen in the deep end and saying, hey, sink or swim there. That's really unfair, and that doesn't set anybody up for success. But I would say, one, get really curious, ask questions, and be candid with each other, but don't expect that you're going to have all the answers right out of the gate. And be gentle with yourselves as you're going through that. It's sometimes it can be a frustrating process, and we're here to help.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you both for all the insights. Thank you for everybody that was here today and everybody that's going to watch this and listen to it later on. We did have a lot of questions that came in both before and
Yeah.
during the
Really
time.
good questions.
Yeah, really appreciate everybody's engagement on that. I know we weren't able to get to everything. I wish we had. We probably need the better part of the day to get to all of that. And we are happy to explore those with you more deeply. If you're here live today, you're going to get an invitation to schedule a one-on-one. That'll come out later today. So keep an eye out for that in your email if you wanted to re-engage on any of the questions that were not answered. Also, we'll have a QR code that should pop up on the screen here shortly that you can use to follow us on LinkedIn if you want to take a moment and scan that. We can keep this conversation going there. And as I mentioned, you'll receive an email within the next few days with a link to the recording. And you'll be the first to know about our upcoming Getting Started with Family Governance program, which we're going to run in December. So the early bird registration will start very soon. So if you're interested in that, please check out the email for more information about that program and information for how to register. We hope that we see many of you there in December. We'll have a survey that's going to come out very shortly here in a moment. If you'd be so kind to fill that out for us, let us know. What did you think? What could we do to be better? Really appreciate all of your thoughts, suggestions about what you took away, what you might recommend for us so that we can continue to bring more value. So again, before we close, thank you everybody for joining today. Echo Tom's comment a minute ago. I hope that you found this to be meaningful, informative, helpful. I know I learned a few things through this, so thank you again for all of that. We look forward to seeing you all hopefully at our program in December, definitely at our next webinar, so keep an eye out for that. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
rest.
everyone.
Thank you.